also, which is going to make it harder for me, so first, I have some requests for you. Number one, if you take photos of me, don't put them in Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp. That company is an engine of surveillance. It can recognize people in photos by their faces or the backs of their heads. So if you put a photo in which other people appear into Facebook, you are helping the company track them. It's bad treatment of your friends, and it's bad treatment of me. So please don't do it to me, and I recommend that you not do it to your friends or anyone, except perhaps your enemies. The best thing is not to be a used of Facebook. Facebook does not have users. It has useds. Also, if you want to take a photo of me with a mobile device, please, in advance, make sure to deactivate the functionality of putting the geolocation into the photo. Also, number two, if you want to make an audio or video recording of my talk, that's okay, but if you want to distribute copies, please do so only in the formats that are favorable to free software. Those are the OGG formats and the WebM format. Please don't distribute in MP anything because those formats are patented in many countries. Especially don't let it be distributed with Flash because Flash requires a non-free program to play. And also don't distribute in Windows Media Player, Real Player, or QuickTime. Don't put it in iTunes. iTunes basically says to people you have to run an Apple non-free system. And it's bad to distribute anything that way. Also, please make sure that the distribution site, when accessed in the normal way, permits downloading a copy of the recording without the users having to run any non-free software. For instance, YouTube, although it distributes the good format WebM, it has a fatal flaw. Normal access to YouTube doesn't work unless you run non-free software sent in the page itself. It's a JavaScript program in the page. Since my browser is designed to block non-free JavaScript code, I can't access YouTube. The price of doing so would be surrendering my freedom, and it's not worth it. But the point is, I don't want my video to tempt people to give up their freedom and run a non-free program. That would undermine the goal. The medium sometimes has a message, and in this case, the message of the medium would be the opposite of my message. That would sabotage things. Also, please put on the copies you distribute the Creative Commons No Derivatives license. This is a presentation of a point of view. So, this talk is about copyright versus community. It's the answer to a question that people sometimes ask me after I give a talk on free software. To make it meaningful, I have to start by introducing free software. So, free software is software that respects users' freedom and community. In Italian, it's software libero. We do not mean that it is gratis. We are not talking about price. Price is a minor detail. Whether you pay to get a copy of a program or get it as a gift, we don't care. Either one can be okay. Either one can be wrong, depending on more important things. For us, the question is not how you get the program, how you get a copy, but rather, once you have a copy, how does it treat you? Does it respect your freedom? Does it respect your community? So what is a program? What is a computer? A computer is a universal computing device, which is actually very simple. It knows how to do one thing: get the next instruction and do what it says. Get the next instruction and do what it says. Get the next instruction, do what it says. Millions of times per second, it gets the next instruction and does what it says. The instructions come from a program. So depending on what program you're running, the same computer can do anything within certain limits. Some things are not possible at all. The computer can't do these things. But among the things that are possible, any computer can do any of them, depending if it has the right program and gets the right instructions. So who gives the instructions to your computer? You might think it's you when really it's someone else. You might think your computer obeys you when really it's obeying someone else first, and obeying you only in second place, when the real master is willing to let it obey you. Would somebody like to go and get the tea from the office? I couldn't bring it with me because I had to bring my bag. With any program, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. It's always one or the other, because there is no other possibility. When the users control the program, that's free software. Why is this? What is freedom? Freedom is having control of your own life, having control of the activities you do in your life. So when you use a program to do the activity, control of the activity requires control of the program. So when the users control the program respects their freedom. And if the users collectively control the program, it respects their community as well. In order for this to be true, the users need the four... Would you pour me some tea?
Sure.
Thanks. I would do it myself, but I'd rather keep talking. These four freedoms are the practical criterion for free software. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program any way you wish for any purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the program's source code and change it so it does your computing the way you wish. Why source code? Why is source code important? Because source code is the form of a program that people can understand easily. Here is an example of source code. It's a mix of math and English. If you've learned the programming language, you can read the code, see what it does, and change it to do something different. To run the program, we convert it into an executable, which is a series of enigmatic ones and zeros. There is some executable code. Even for a programmer, it's not obvious what that code does. Now, for such a short program, the programmer could study it and figure it out. But for a big, real program, that job is so big that it's prohibitive. Only a few people do it because it's so hard. It's called reverse engineering. It's tremendously important. But if we said to users, oh, you're free to change this program, you just have to reverse engineer it first, that's ridiculous. That would be a freedom that's theoretical only and does not exist at the practical level. So, for freedom 1 to be practical, the users must get the source code. Well, these two freedoms give us separate control over the program. I can change my copies, and you can change your copies. Here we see one user changing the program. while 3 other users use it the way they got it. Well, separate control is essential, but it's not enough because most users don't know how to understand source code. They can't program. They're not programmers because they do something else. There are lots of things in the world that people do. People have different abilities and different interests. The important thing is, even though they don't know how to change source code, they deserve some control over the program anyway. How can they have it? Through collective control, which means that you're free to collaborate with other people to exercise control over the program together as a group, collectively. Here is a group of 3 users exercising collective control over the program. 2 of them are actually changing the code. Obviously, they are programmers. The 3rd one is not changing the code. Maybe he's a non-programmer. But by participating in the discussions about what changes to make, he can participate in exercising control over the program. The people who collaborate this way are those who choose to collaborate. Here we see 2 more users that are not working with those 3. It's not obvious why not. Maybe they don't know the other 3. Maybe they distrust those 3. Maybe they just want something different. They see what those 3 are trying to do and they say, I don't like that. So they prefer to stick with the unmodified version. Maybe tomorrow they'll all start working together. The point is, those who wish to work together are free to do so. This requires 2 more freedoms. Freedom 2 is the freedom to make exact copies of the program as you got it and give or sell them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is to make copies of your modified versions to give or sell to others when you wish. These 2 freedoms permit the members of any group to work together. So if one makes a modified version, by freedom 3, she is free to make copies and give or sell to others. And they, with freedom 2, can make more copies to distribute to yet others. Also, they're free to offer copies to other users, even to publish their versions, which means offering copies to the general public. One specific part of freedom 2 has a special moral importance when it's sharing. Sharing means redistribution in a non-commercial way of exact copies between people. Sharing has special moral importance because this is the basis of community in a digital world. This is how people help each other. So any law or technical practice designed to stop people from sharing, that were aimed at stopping people from sharing, is directly and explicitly antisocial. It's an attack against society. It's divide and rule. And of course we know who the rulers are. They're the publishers. So I believe that every published work must be shareable, free to share. That's a little bit of freedom that should apply to everything. When we say a work is libero, that's a lot more freedom, but it only applies to it's only necessary, it's only ethically required for the works that people use to do jobs. Remember, the argument is to control your life, you have to control the program you're using to do your activities. Works that are functional, that are meant to be used to do something, those works have to be free. Because each user deserves to have control over the activities that she's doing with those works. And this is not just for programs that are published. Nobody should ever be given a program that and not have control over it. So even if a non-free program is offered only to a few users, it's still an injustice. So if the program carries these 4 freedoms adequately, then it's free software. Because of these freedoms, the users have control of the program, so it respects their freedom. I should repeat the 4 freedoms and point out that they're not required. You're free to do these things. You're not obligated to do these things. So, freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish. You should have this freedom, but it's not required. You can also, if you're a masochist, you can run the program as you don't wish. You're also free not to run it at all. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code and change it to make it work the way you wish. But this is not required. You can get the program and run it without looking at any source code. That's actually the more frequent case. With Freedom 2, you can make exact copies and give or sell them when you wish. But you don't have to do this. You're free to do it when you wish. And with Freedom 3, if you have made a modified version, you're free to distribute copies of it to others when you wish. But you don't have to ever distribute copies to others. You're free to use it privately, too. Then we call it a private program. A private program is free software in a trivial way. There's only one user, and that one user has the 4 freedoms, so it's free software. Nobody is being oppressed by that program. So, if the program comes with these 4 freedoms, it's free software, and that's the ethical way. But if one of these freedoms is missing or insufficient, then the users do not control the program. Instead, the program controls the users, and the proprietor controls the program. So the proprietor, through this program, has power over the users, unjust power that no one should ever have. A non-free program is a yoke. Sometimes I suggest calling it software soggiogante. But other people say the word is too strong. I don't speak Italian, I don't really know. But no one has found a better term in Italian so far. Maybe you can think of a better one. The point is, the proprietor, through this non-free program, exercises power over the users. That's an injustice already. But because the proprietors know that they have power, the power corrupts them. They start looking for ways they can use that power to gain more profit at the expense of their own users by mistreating them. And they put malicious functionalities into their proprietary programs. And that's the second injustice, or the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and 6th, because sometimes one proprietary program has many malicious functionalities. Let me describe them. Oh, I should say, you've probably heard the term malware, right? Malware means a program designed to mistreat the users. But most discussions of malware only talk about viruses and things that are forcibly stuck into users' computers. That is one-sided because many proprietary programs, including Windows and Mac OS and Android and the software of the eye things, are malware also. It's a mistake to discuss malware and then ignore everything except the viruses. But that's what they often do to discourage people from recognizing how malicious the proprietary software is. What do? Well, they spy on users. This is the Amazon swindle. Swindle means enganno. This is Amazon's ebook reader. Amazon's Orwellian ebook reader, which spies on the users. Every so often, it transmits the title of the book to Amazon servers, and it transmits the page number to Amazon servers. And if the user highlights any text, sent to Amazon. If the user enters notes, sent to Amazon. Total surveillance of the user's reading. Spy functionalities are also found in Windows, in Mac OS, in the iPhone, in Flash Player, and in nearly all portable phones, and in many apps for mobile devices. Many apps snoop on the user, sending information when there's literally absolutely no reason. For instance, flashlight apps were observed to send data to many websites. Why? Can't they tell how to turn on the screen without any help from some other site? No, it's just for spying. Of course, all the streaming apps like Spotify and Netflix snoop on the users. So we say, out, damned Spotify. The Uber application spies on users. Uber requires riders to identify themselves, which is an injustice. Massive surveillance like that should not be allowed. And many other proprietary programs spy on people, but let's move on. There's also le manette digitale, digital handcuffs. In English, digital restrictions management, DRM. These are the functionalities, deliberately implemented functionalities to stop users from doing what they want to do. And they know what users want to do. They work very hard to make it impossible. For instance, in Blu-ray discs, they're an example. Blu-ray discs carry manette digitale, and no one has been able to break them with free software. So I won't use them. I have never used a Blu-ray disc. And I will only start if we have free software that can break the handcuffs. DRM has been found in Windows, in Mac OS, in Flash Player, in the Amazon Swindle, and in many apps, including Spotify, Netflix, and more. Even the software sent by YouTube in the page has a kind of DRM. Then there are backdoors. A backdoor receives commands from somebody which tell the program to do something nasty to the user. Well, in principle, it doesn't have to be something nasty, but the reason why they don't ask the user for approval is because they plan to do something nasty. Here's an example. The Amazon Swindle has a backdoor for erasing books. We know this from observation. In 2009, Amazon remotely erased thousands of copies of a particular book in a giant Orwellian act. And what was the book? It was 1984 by George Orwell. This provoked a lot of criticism, so Amazon said it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. If you have read 1984, that's not a very comforting promise, is it? But actually, it was not a promise. Amazon was just talking. Amazon didn't mean it. A few years later, Amazon started again remotely erasing books without even an order from the state. We also know of other backdoors. For instance, every telephone with GPS will transmit the GPS location on remote command. That's a backdoor for snooping on the user. The iThings have a backdoor for remotely erasing apps. Apple can order any iThing to remotely erase any app. Amazon has a somewhat bigger backdoor. Google has the power to erase any app or forcibly install an app. Google could write an app just for you and forcibly install it. Isn't that nice? Then there is censorship. Apple practices censorship of applications. Apple was the first, in the iPhone, the first general purpose computer which could not install the apps of the user's choice. Users were not free to do so. They could only install apps approved by Apple from Apple's store. And Apple practices this censorship arbitrarily according to its business interests and its political positions. Someone built an app that would display information about U.S. drone bombings, and Apple refused to authorize it because Apple didn't like the attitude of that app. And then someone wrote a game about what it's like to be a child in occupied Palestine. Apple refused to authorize that game. When users find a way to bypass the censorship, they call it jailbreaking. In effect, recognizing that these computers were designed as jails for the user. That's our term for a computer that censors applications. We call them jails. By the way, Microsoft mobile devices are jails too. And then the ultimate in nastiness, the universal backdoor. This is a backdoor that allows remote forcible installation of software changes. So Windows has a universal backdoor. It was first discovered in Windows XP. Microsoft didn't admit that it was there, but people proved it was there. So, to show how ethical standards have declined, in Windows 10, Microsoft has announced the presence of the universal backdoor. No room for doubt anymore. It's called auto upgrade. Auto upgrade is another name for universal backdoor. We don't know in most cases whether other, because it's hard to tell that there's a universal backdoor. But in some cases we know. For instance, the Amazon swindle has a universal backdoor. So do nearly all portable phones. And in fact, this universal backdoor is regularly employed to convert them into listening devices that listen 24 hours a day and transmit all the conversations they hear. And you don't have to speak right into the mic. It can listen from over there. And if you think of getting your privacy back by switching it off, surprise, there's no off switch. All the phone has is a button where you request that it turn itself off. Once they have modified it this way, it doesn't really switch off ever. Instead, it pretends to switch off. It pretends that it's off, but really it's still running, listening, and transmitting. The only way to get your privacy and defend it from that is to remove all the batteries, not just the big obvious battery. There may be another smaller battery. So, a mobile phone tracks its users everywhere and can be made to listen to them all the time. I call it Stalin's dream. Stalin would have loved to be able to give everyone in the Soviet Union one of these devices that would track the person and listen to the person all the time. But the technology didn't exist yet. We are now subject to far more surveillance than the inhabitants of the former Soviet Union. It's too much. We must reduce this for democracy to survive. Look at gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance vs democracy.html. In the meantime, I just do not carry a mobile phone. I refuse. Stalin's dream is so disgusting, I won't let anything pressure me into carrying one. You'd have to have a gun pointed at me. Then there's another way that proprietary developers attack their own users. Microsoft, when it discovers a security bug in Windows, shows the bug to the NSA before it fixes the bug. So it's helping the U.S. government attack the computers of its own users. Microsoft regularly betrays its own users. Do you think the Italian state should use Windows? Obviously not. But we don't know whether other companies do this. We know only in the case of Microsoft. Other companies might be doing this or they might not. Well, these are just a few examples. If you want more, look at gnu.org/proprietary. Lots of examples of proprietary malware. Dozens. But these examples are enough to show that nearly all the users of proprietary software are victims of proprietary malware already. Because the examples I showed you are very widely used. Almost everyone that uses proprietary software uses one of them, and therefore is using malware. They do this because they can profit at their users' expense by subjugating their users more. Now, there are thousands of proprietary programs, and most of them we don't know anything about. We don't know whether they have malicious functionalities. So there are two possibilities for a proprietary program. Either we know about some malicious functionality and it's demonstrated malware, or we don't know and it's possible malware. Those are the only possibilities. There's no way to check. There's no way to verify that the program is honest. The proprietary developers don't let us have control. We can't check. So there is never a rational basis to trust a proprietary program. It's either blind faith or don't use it. And it's blind faith often in a company that has already betrayed its own users. So basically, it's using proprietary software is asking to be mistreated. And the only defense is free software. Free software is the only known defense against malware. With free software, the users control the program. They can look through the code to try to find something bad, and if they find something bad, they can fix it. With proprietary, even when we know about a malicious functionality, there's nothing we can do to change it. The users of proprietary software are totally at the mercy of the developer. With free software, not only do the users have a defense, but that also means we don't face temptation because we don't have any power and we know it. So we don't get corrupted. We are fortunately safe from the corrupting influence of the power that proprietary developers exercise. So if you want to develop software and you don't want to be corrupted, make sure it's free software. So what you need to do is escape from proprietary software and come live in the free world we have built. With the GNU operating system and the Linux kernel, we have made it possible to use a computer with free software only and thus not be oppressed by the proprietors of your software. I started GNU in January '84. In 1991, GNU was almost complete, but one essential component was missing, the kernel. The kernel allocates the machine's resources to other programs you run. We were developing a kernel already, the GNU herd, but I chose a design that was too elegant and advanced, so it became a research project. It took 6 years to have a test version. Fortunately, we didn't have to wait for that, because in 1992, Mr. Torvalds liberated the source code of Linux. He started Linux in '91, but it was proprietary then. The license was too restrictive. In '92, he changed to a free license, so Linux was fitted into the remaining gap in GNU, producing the GNU/Linux operating system. For the first time, a complete operating system that you could run on a PC. You could buy a PC and run it without non-free software. You will hear people talking about GNU/Linux and calling it just Linux. That's treating us very badly. It's unfair and mean. To attribute our work to somebody else who started years later and did less. He did a substantial job. I think it's fine to give him equal mention, but please give us equal mention too. If you call the system GNU/Linux, that's what you're doing. Please help us in this way. We need it. In principle, GNU/Linux is a free operating system, but in practice, often it's not, because there are many distributions, and in each distribution, the developers add other programs. And sometimes those other programs are non-free. That means their distribution as a whole is not free. In order for a system to be free, every piece of it must be free, with no exceptions. If there's one non-free piece, that takes away the user's freedom. So the collection takes away the user's freedom. There are over 1,000 GNU/Linux distributions, but almost all contain non-free software. There are about 10 distributions that are free. Look at gnu.org/distros for details. I ask you please not to promote the non-free distros. When you do that, it teaches people not to care about freedom. For instance, Ubuntu is the most harmful distribution because it's very popular. So lots of people install it, and it puts in non-free software. And they don't think about this. They don't know about this. So they were told to avoid nasty non-free software install, they'll often say install Linux. They mean GNU/Linux. So the person installs Ubuntu and they get closer to freedom. It's much better than using Windows or Mac OS, but they don't get all the way to freedom. They stop a certain point at a distance because they don't know. Worse, the non-free distros, when they are very popular, they have a lot of influence over people's thought. The developers of Ubuntu could say, you deserve freedom and control of your computing, and we don't give that to you. Of course, they don't say that. They don't want to criticize themselves for their flaws. Instead, they say, we try to give you the best possible user experience. So what they're teaching people is value convenience. Don't think about freedom and community. Don't think about justice and injustice. Well, that influence has an effect. It weakens our movement. So this is a reason not to promote Ubuntu. For more info, look at gnu.org/distros. In order to make a program free, you have to put on a free license. That's because every program is automatically copyrighted because it's a written work. And copyright law, by default, forbids copying it, distributing it, modifying it, even running it. So how do we give users the freedom to do that? The copyright holders of the code have to put on a formal declaration that says, you, as a user with a copy of this program, have these freedoms. We call that a free software license. There are two main kinds of free software licenses. There are the weak, lax, permissive licenses, and there is copyleft. The lax, permissive license says, oh, do whatever you like with this code. Well, that does make the code free, but in a way that fails to defend freedom, because it tells companies that they're permitted to put the code into a proprietary program, and so they do. This is what happened with Apache. The Apache web server is free software. It's under a free license, the Apache Software License 2.0. And so if you get Apache, it comes with freedom. But IBM got a copy of Apache and put that code and decided to convert that code into a proprietary program, adding some other features. And if you get that version, you don't have freedom. Well, when I first had a GNU program ready to distribute, I had already seen this problem. I knew what would happen if I used a weak license like that. So I invented copyleft, which is a different kind of free license that says when you redistribute, with or without changes, you are required to keep the same license and make source code available. Basically, when you distribute copies to others, you have to pass along to them the same freedom you got from us. So we're telling the middlemen, the companies, you can redistribute this as free software, but you can't convert it into software soggiogante. You can't use our code to subjugate people. And the result is the businesses often decide to work with us and contribute to the free version. Even the same businesses, when they are allowed to make it proprietary software, they do. When we stop them from doing that, they join and cooperate with us. So it's very important to copyleft your code. There are people who will try to pressure you not to do so. Sometimes they are working for businesses that want to convert your code into proprietary software. Sometimes they have been manipulated by such businesses. Either way, don't listen to them. What are the obstacles to winning freedom? The companies that subjugate people using proprietary software make lots of money, and they use that money to create obstacles. The main barrier to moving to free software is social inertia. It takes many forms. For instance, imagine that there is a very convenient proprietary program, so lots of people use it. That's social inertia. If that program ceased to exist, maybe its replacement would be free. Maybe more people would be motivated to improve the free software. But they go further than that. the program may store the data in a secret format, store users' own data that the users put in. It may be stored in a secret format so that the users can't switch to any other program. That's another form of social inertia. Microsoft made PC manufacturers agree to pay for a Windows license even when they sell a machine without Windows. Now, these contracts should be generally illegal, contracts of this kind, but they're not. In some countries, I think in Italy, the purchaser has the right to demand a refund of the Windows license fee if she doesn't use Windows. But this is not good enough. So in any case, that's more social inertia. In some countries, schools are teaching the use of proprietary software, thus leading the future generations towards subjugation and dependence. That's more social inertia. So whenever these companies appear, we need to protest against them. Another obstacle is open source. The reason why some people say open source instead of free software is to forget the ethical ideas we try to raise. That's the reason why they invented the term open source. I knew some of the people who together invented and promoted that term. I know what they wanted, and several of them really wanted our ideas to be forgotten. So, open source is actually a right-wing co-optation and depoliticization campaign aimed at the free software movement. With their new term, they could invent a different discourse, one that never presented this as an ethical issue. So we say if you make a program and distribute it, it's your moral duty to respect users' freedom to change it and redistribute it. They say if you develop a program and distribute it, it might be in your practical interest to let users change and redistribute it, because then they'll improve the code quality. So you'll notice they accept without question that the developer is entitled and legitimately can make the program proprietary, whereas we say that's an injustice and you should never do it. Furthermore, they appeal only to superficial practical values like code quality, whereas for us, freedom and community are the values that matter. They were the majority in 1998 when they promoted this term. People with those views were the majority, and the businesses joined them. The journalists and editors followed the businesses, and since then we have to work hard to get the term free software or software libero into the mainstream media or the technology press. So it's very important, if you want to help us, to avoid the term open source. Just don't say that. You'll have noticed that I have never used that term here in this talk except to say I disagree with it. That's the only way it's the only time I say open source is to explain why I disagree with it. When I talk about programs, when I discuss what I do, I say libero. But we have to work against spreading misinformation. Most people think I support open source. I've even seen articles that called me the father of open source. So I sent a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my consent. Then I explained the idea of free software. So schools should teach only free software, because teaching the use of a non-free program is sowing dependency. It's the opposite of the social mission of the school, which is to teach people to be good citizens of a society that is strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free. Teaching the use of non-free software is like teaching people to smoke tobacco. And now you can see why some proprietary software companies offer gratis or cheap copies to schools, just like tobacco companies used to hand out gratis cigarettes. But there's also a matter of education and citizenship. Schools should teach students to be good, cooperating members of society. Schools should teach the habit of helping other people. So every class should have this rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share copies with the rest of the class, including source code, in case someone here wants to learn. So it is not permitted to bring proprietary software to this class. Of course, the school has to set a good example by following its own rule. But there's also the education of the best programmers. Every program embodies knowledge. If it's proprietary, it conceals that knowledge from the student. It is the enemy of the spirit of education, so it should not be tolerated in a school except for reverse engineering. But a free program offers its knowledge to the students. Would you like to pour some more tea? I do it myself, but this is a bit of a hurry. And that's necessary for the education of good programmers. How do you learn to write good, clear code? By reading lots of code and writing lots of code. Only free software gives you the chance to read the code of large programs we really use. Then you have to write lots of code. To write good code for large programs, you have to write lots of code for large programs. And in doing so, you have to start small, which means writing small changes for large programs. Writing small programs is not even a beginning for writing code for large programs, but only free software gives you the chance to write changes in large programs we actually use. Any school can offer the possibility of mastering the craft of programming if it is a free software school. Human rights depend on each other. If we lose one, it becomes hard to defend the others. Now that we use computing for so much important activity, control of our computing, in other words, free software, is one of the human rights we need in order to defend other human rights. We must not sacrifice this. Instead, we have to make small sacrifices for freedom. Sometimes a job is going to be harder to do because you're doing it in a way that doesn't take away your freedom. Sometimes you may have to do without some convenience or some pleasure. Well, freedom sometimes requires a sacrifice. So how do you help us? Well, if you're a programmer, a good programmer, you can contribute to free software projects. Make 15 big contributions to other software projects. Then you'll know how to run a project yourself. But if you're not a programmer, you can do other things that are just as important. For instance, free software organizing and activism. It's like any other political cause. It requires activism. Someone needs to keep the records of the membership list. Someone needs to send out mailings saying, we're going to have a protest over there at the Apple store next Friday. Who wants to come? We need speakers. we have a lot of programmers. We don't have a lot of speakers. We could really use more speakers in Italy. You can persuade schools and governments to move to free software. For schools, look at gnu.org/education. For governments, look at gnu.org/government. If you're an expert user, you can help other people use GNU/Linux. Start a GNU/Linux user group. Or if there's an existing user group that calls itself a Linux user group, push the group to change its name and start respecting our work. You can say free software, or even better in Italy, software libero. So now it's time for me to move on to the rest of the topic, to the main topic. Because this was just the long introduction. So, but in general, GNU.org offers you more information. GNU.org/licenses tells you all about licenses and which ones are free and which are copyleft and which are not, and other information. GNU.org/philosophy gives lots of information about, dozens of articles about political and philosophical points. GNU.org/GNU gives the history of GNU development. GNU.org/distros describes the distros which are free and which are not. And GNU.org/proprietary gives lots of examples of proprietary malware, so you can show people that they are being mistreated by the proprietary software they use. FSF.org has lots of useful resources, as well as a way to join the FSF and a store and a way to donate. But you can donate here. We'll happily accept any amount. Also, if you wish to pay your membership dues in cash, you can become a member here. You could fill out a form and then hand it to me with your dues to be a member. So, people used to ask me at the end of a talk on free software, do these ideas apply to anything else other than software? So I had to think about it, and eventually I reached some answers. First of all, where do these ideas make sense? They're mostly not applicable to physical objects, because mostly we don't have copiers for physical objects. There's no copier for this clock. There's maybe a copier for this bottle, but it's not easy. No copier for microphones or tables or cups. There are only a few kinds of things that we use can be copied, like keys. There are some things you can make with a 3D printer, and I suppose as that technology advances, it'll be possible to make more things that way. But it's still rather limited. However, there are some things for which this question makes sense. Works. Any work that can be in a computer, with the computer, you can copy it and you can edit it. So the question of whether you're free to do so becomes a real, practical, important question. So, what should you be free to do with your copies of works? Well, for the most part, with some exceptions that are unfortunately getting more common, the only thing that would limit what you can do with those works is copyright law. So we can ask the same question from the other side. What should copyright law say about works? It's useful to consider this question along with the history of copyright law, which is connected with the history of copying technology. So let's look at that history. Copying of works began in the ancient world. It was done with a pen and ink. You would read one copy and write another. This technology was slow and primitive and had some other interesting characteristics. First, there was no economy of scale. Making 10 copies this way would take you 10 times as long as making one copy. Second, it required no special technology other than the technology for reading and writing. Third, no special skill other than literacy itself. The result was decentralized production of copies. Everywhere that somebody had one copy and wanted to make another, he could. And he would. There was no idea of copyright in the ancient world. If you had a copy and you wanted to make another, you were free to do so. Now, if the local prince didn't like your the work that you were copying, he might punish you horribly. But that was not copyright, that was censorship. In fact, copyright has always been related to censorship. Things went along for thousands of years. And then there was a big advance in copying technology, the printing press, which made copying more efficient in a non-uniform way. In the age of the printing press, mass production in the ancient world, mass production copying and one-off copying were equally slow. The printing press made mass production copying much more efficient, but did not help one-off copying. That was done the old way. So, the result was that printing technology had an economy of scale, because setting the type took time, but then you could make many identical copies fast. That's why mass production copying benefited and not one-off copying. Also, the printing press and the letters were expensive equipment. Most people who could read and write did not have a printing press or type, and they also didn't know how to use them. That was a different skill from reading and writing. The result was centralized production of copies. Copies of any given work would be made in a few places and then distributed to places where someone wanted to buy them. Copyright began in the age of the printing press. Today's copyright goes back to England in 1556, I believe, when a censorship measure was adopted for censorship of Protestants. The law said that before you could publish a book, you had to get permission from the state. The permission was granted as a monopoly for that one publisher, a perpetual monopoly. Although the law itself had to be renewed from time to time, the monopolies were perpetual. And this turned out to be a very effective means of discouraging publication. But the censorship became obsolete in the 1600s later. So the law was allowed to lapse. The publishers begged for their monopoly again, but what was adopted instead gave the monopoly to the author for a limited period of time, 14 years, and it could be renewed 14 more years if the author was still alive. and thus began the idea of copyright as a system to encourage authorship. When the U.S. Constitution was written, there was a suggestion that authors should be entitled to a copyright. This was rejected. The U.S. Constitution does not say that anyone is entitled to a copyright. It says, Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and the useful arts by reserving to authors and inventors for a limited time the exclusive use of their respective writings and discoveries. This shows us three fundamental points. First, it's not required to have a copyright system. This only gives permission optionally to have one. Second, if it exists to promote progress. In other words, for the good of the public, not for the good of the author, let alone the good of the publisher. And finally, copyright must last for a limited time. Ever since then, publishers have been trying to cause these decisions to be forgotten. However, in the age of the printing press, there was not much controversy. You see, copyright in the age of the printing press functioned as an industrial regulation, regulating publishers under the control of the authors, but designed to provide benefits to the public. As a result, it was easy to enforce, uncontroversial, and arguably beneficial for the public. It was easy to enforce because it only had to be enforced against publishers. Copyright enforcement was easy. You could go to a bookstore and say, who published this? It didn't require invading people's homes, computers, or internet connections. It was uncontroversial because it only restricted publishers. Everyone else had nothing to complain about. And finally, it was arguably beneficial because it was understood as a trade between the public and the authors. The public traded away their natural right to copy anything to the authors in exchange for authors making more works. The public was willing to trade away this natural right because the public had no way to exercise it feasibly. It was too hard. So the public didn't miss it. People didn't complain, I'm not allowed to publish this book. If you complained, that meant you were a publisher. And in exchange, the system provided some incentive for publishing more books. And if we were still in the age of the printing press, I don't think I'd be complaining about copyright law. However, we are now seeing another advance in copying technology, which once again makes copying more efficient in a non-uniform way. This is digital technology. In the age of the printing press, we saw mass production copying ever more efficient and one-off copying still slow. With digital technology, we get this. It helps mass production copying, but it especially helps one-off copying, bringing us back to a situation like the ancient world where the difference between mass production and one-off is not so much. For instance, a one-off CD is more expensive than a mass-produced CD, but it's cheap enough that hundreds of millions of people can make them and do. This changes the effect of copyright law. Even if the text of the law, the words of the law, were exactly the same, their consequences would be tremendously different, because now they want to apply copyright to everybody, not just to publishers. So copyright is no longer an industrial regulation on publishers controlled by the authors but designed to provide benefit to the public. Now it's an oppressive imposition on the general public, controlled mainly by the publishers in the name of the authors. In other words, it's intolerable. We've got to get rid of it as it stands. But I don't propose to eliminate copyright entirely. I propose to change the aspects that are unacceptable and oppressive today. Because of this change, copyright law is no longer easy to enforce, no longer uncontroversial, and no longer are arguably beneficial. It's no longer easy to enforce because it has to be enforced against everyone, or at least the publishers want to enforce it against everyone, and that requires invading everybody's home computer and network connection. It's no longer uncontroversial. On the contrary, it has inspired the creation of political parties, one of which may get to form the next government of Iceland. And it's no longer beneficial because the natural right that governments traded away on our behalf, and we accepted that because we couldn't exercise the right anyway, has now become useful. We want to copy. We want the freedom to copy. We want to be able to copy. It is now part of sharing, which is good, which builds community. So we must make governments stop this deal that has become wrong. What would a democratic government do if it wanted to represent the people? It would reduce copyright power. We can measure the sickness of democracy around the world by governments' tendency to do the exact opposite. They're extending copyright power in every possible dimension because they're obeying the publishers. They're plutocratic governments. For instance, there's the dimension of time. Copyright lasts too long. In Europe, it lasts until, I believe, 70 years after the author's death. And there's a worldwide trend for countries to make copyright last longer, which is ridiculous. The U.S. made copyright last 20 years more in 1998 for future works and past works. Now, how are they going to encourage making more works? By extending the monopoly for works that already exist. They'd need to have a time machine. And apparently they haven't used it because history books don't report that the artists of the 1920s were informed that they would have 20 more years of copyright in the far future, and so they set to work with renewed vigor. Why don't they use their time machine and get us more old classics? Now, it's theoretically conceivable that 20 more years of copyright on future works would convince people to make them, but only if they're nuts. And the reason is the discounted present value of 20 more years of copyright starting 50 years after you're dead is so little that it wouldn't rationally influence anybody's decision. And contrary to rumor, most artists are not crazy, and they would know better than to be fooled by this. The reason they did it is, the reason Congress voted for this is it was paid by Disney and some other companies to do so. Laws in the U.S. are for sale, and this law was bought by the publishers. Disney had a lucrative monopoly over the appearance of Mickey Mouse through the copyright. But that copyright was going to expire. So Disney wanted to extend it by 20 years. But really, the movie companies say they want perpetual copyright. However, since the U.S. Constitution doesn't allow perpetual copyright, all they can do is extend it by 20 years every 20 years. I expect that in 2 years they'll try to pass another such law. Now, Europe extended the length of copyright on sound recordings just a few years ago. They're still attacking your freedom in this way. It's always wrong to make copyright last longer because it lasts too long. But there's an even more important dimension, which is breadth of the power. Which uses of a copyrighted work should copyright cover? Traditionally, copyright was not supposed to cover all uses of a copyrighted work. There was a space of unrestricted free usage, and then certain activities were regulated by copyright as an exception. But now the publishers want to impose a pay-per-view universe and do it through malicious functionalities in proprietary software, le manette digitali, digital restrictions management. They want to publish everything with digital restrictions management and use that to control everything that people do with these works. This is why it is vital absolutely to reject works that have DRM. So, for instance, don't use Netflix. Netflix is DRM. iTunes, for everything except music, is DRM. Spotify, in most modes of use, is DRM. Other streaming disc services are DRM. They are your enemy. When you recognize that they are designed to attack your freedom, when you hate them as they deserve to be hated, you won't even think of using them. You'll say, I don't need to hear that. I don't need to watch that. I'll do without it. To hell with them. We have to build up this attitude, because this attitude is what has to motivate people to fight against DRM and defeat this attack on our freedom. The publishers gained part of the power they want in 1998 in the U.S. with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which made it a crime to break the digital handcuffs or show people how. You would be safe from that, but unfortunately the European Union adopted a similar directive in 2003, and both of those entities have been pressuring other countries to adopt similar unjust laws. When a government adopts such a law, it takes the side of the publishers against the people. Essentially, it's a form of treason. Although not as big as some other forms, that's what sort of thing it is. Thank you. So what would a democratic government concretely do to copyright law? It would reduce copyright power to the point where the people could tolerate it, where we could live with it. There's a dimension of time. I recommend that copyright last 10 years from the date of publication. Why from the date of publication? Before that, we don't have copies. We're not missing anything. It doesn't matter whether we would be theoretically allowed to redistribute copies of works we don't have. We might as well let the artist have as long as it takes to arrange publication and then start the clock. Why 10 years? Because the usual publication cycle lasts 3 years. In 2 years, the work will be remaindered, that is, the remaining copies sold off at a low price, and in 3 years, out of print. Which shows that 10 years is plenty. So I say, let's let them have 10 years and then give people freedom to do what they like. Not everybody agrees with this. I once made this proposal in a panel discussion with fiction writers. I expected opposition, and I got opposition. A prize-winning fantasy writer on the table said, 5 years, 10 years, that's outrageous. Nothing more than 5. Yeah, I was surprised too. Because when the publishers ask for more power, they bring out some bestseller writers and some star performers who say, we want more years of copyright. We want 5 centuries of copyright. For past works too, why should you be allowed to copy Bach's works or Monteverdi's? Well, and we think that that's what artists all want. But you see, the same publishers that treat the stars very well are crushing the other artists. But we don't get to hear about that. This writer had won a prize, but his book was not a bestseller, and it was out of print. At least his fans couldn't get copies. The publisher wouldn't sell them anyway, any copies. So they wrote to him and said, could you please send us copies? We'll even pay you. But the publisher said he wasn't allowed to. The publisher was using the copyright on his book to stop him from distributing copies to his fans, which he wanted to do so they could read it. His contract said that if the book went out of print, the rights would revert to him, but the publisher wouldn't recognize that the book was out of print. So he had a legal dispute with his publisher. He had learned that more than 5 years of copyright was unlikely to ever do him any good, but it could certainly do him harm. Well, if everyone else wants 5 years, I'll go along with it. I propose 10 years just because I'm a bit cautious. I don't want to be quite so radical. But the big dimension is breadth. Which uses of a copyrighted work should be legal? I believe this depends on the kind of work. Some works are functional, practical works. They exist to be used instrumentally to do a job. This doesn't mean that there are no aesthetic details, but it does mean that the aesthetics are not the purpose. The purpose is so you can use it and do your job. Some activity that you want to do. Not only your employment, not only business, but even if you're using it in your private life, you're still using it rather than saying, oh, what beautiful code. So those works ought to be free. Someday I hope that all these works will be free. I don't want to propose a change in law to make all software free now, because I don't think society is ready to accept that. But I hope that someday it will be ready. But there are other categories of works. There are works that express a point of view, like this talk. For these works, modified versions I don't see any good in. They would just misrepresent the person who was stating a position. This means we don't need to authorize commercial redistribution. So what I recommend is to legalize sharing. But copyright would still apply to commercial use and modification. So it would be a somewhat reduced copyright system. And that would go on for 10 years, and then people could do what they like. The other category of works is artistic and entertainment works. For these, the issue of modified versions was difficult for me, because I agree that an artistic work can have an artistic integrity, and modifying it can ruin it. Just look at so many movies that Hollywood makes from works and ruins them. If you're carrying a portable tracking and surveillance device, please turn it off. They've already tracked you here, and if they want to listen to me, well, somebody may be making a recording. In any case, I'm stating the same views I've stated publicly many times before. They don't need to listen to me through your portable surveillance device. Anyway, on the other hand, modifying an artistic work can lead to something very rich. Consider, for instance, Shakespeare. Some of Shakespeare's plays reused a story that had been found in some previous work. If today's copyright laws had been in existence then, Shakespeare would not have been allowed to stage these plays or publish them, so they would not have been written either. And the copyright holders, if Shakespeare had objected to this, the copyright holders would have said, Shakespeare just wants to ruin our masterpieces. And if Shakespeare had not been allowed to do it, we could never have argued. We would have had no way to call into question those claims. But since he did write them, we can say they're important contributions to literature, and it would be a shame if he had not written them. So, what to do about modified versions of artistic works? Well, it's going to go into the public domain someday, and then people will be allowed to publish modified versions. That's already the case. And I'm proposing that should happen after 10 years. Well, you can wait 10 years to publish your modified version. So I propose for 10 years the current the partly reduced copyright system, giving everyone permission for sharing copies, but still applying copyright to commercial use and modification. And then after 10 years, it's in the public domain and people can publish modified versions. So that's the basic change in copyright law about what people are allowed to do. But if we want to legalize sharing, we have to defend that freedom. We have to make DRM a crime. Because if we say everyone, you have freedom, unless they design the hardware to stop you, they'll just design all the hardware to stop you. So we have to make DRM a crime. Then, what will they try? They'll try to make you agree to an end-user license agreement which says you can't share. We have to legislate that such contracts are void, that no contract can legally stop you from sharing copies of a published work. That if they try to do that, that the contract is void. No matter where you signed it, each country should legislate it's void here. And this way, even if you have to go to another country to get it, when you bring it home, you're free to share. We also have to make sure that remix is legal. Remix is a practice where you take pieces out of various works and you put them together, perhaps with something that you make yourself, to make a work that's fundamentally different from the others that you got pieces of. It's not basically, there's a piece that's similar, but overall it's totally different. You might have noticed think about the many remixes of the movie Downfall, or part of the movie, not the whole thing, of course. It was Hitler giving a soliloquy, basically, and people replaced that with talking about some other issue, nothing to do with Nazis generally. And the first one, I think, was talking about the injustice of today's copyright law. So, remix has to be legal because the purpose of copyright is to encourage making new, different works. If it's interpreted in such a way as to create obstacles for that, it has been turned upside down. And that's, of course, what's happened, because instead of being used to promote progress, it's being used to give certain companies guaranteed income through a stranglehold on the arts. Now, if we do this, these companies will complain. They'll say, we're not going to make the money we're entitled to. How much money are they entitled to make? I don't know, maybe minus $1 billion is what they're entitled to. Look at what they've done to people. They have pushed, first they started insulting people, calling people who share pirates. Please refuse to use the term, quote, piracy, unquote, when you're talking about sharing. Call it sharing, so that we reject their propaganda. But they didn't stop there. Then they started pushing the digital handcuffs into our technology products, converting our computers from our servants into our prison guards. And then they started passing laws making it a crime to break these digital handcuffs. And then they passed laws in many countries to discard the basic principle of justice: no punishment without a fair trial. They punish people who are simply accused of sharing. And they impose collective responsibility. In Germany, people have been punished just for having a Wi-Fi network without a key, because they were conscripted into the war on sharing and punished for refusing to help oppressed people. That law has just been apparently eliminated, which is good. But collective responsibility is a frequent practice of tyrants. We shouldn't be surprised when efforts to impose laws that the people hate turn out to trigger collective responsibility. But then what they want to do now is punish people when they're accused of sharing. They don't need to prove anyone actually did so. They want punishment on accusation. And in Japan, they're going even further. It's now a crime punished by 2 years imprisonment to download anything from the internet without authorization. Even one song, 2 years in prison. I suppose if you download 100 songs, they would imprison you for 200 years. And if that's not enough to make people stop, I guess they will start shooting people for sharing. That's the logical conclusion, isn't it? But it's no accident that all these measures are draconian and cruel. They're trying to impose injustice on society. But remember, sharing is good, and nowadays with digital technology, sharing is easy, so people share. Only cruelty will make people stop. What these, oh, I forgot to mention, suing thousands of teenagers for hundreds of thousands of dollars. We should wipe out those companies for the evil that they've done. They should go broke. But what about the artists? I'm completely against the idea of remunerating artists because you appreciate their work. Now, there is one situation where artists deserve remuneration. When you hire them, if you engage some artists to do some work for you and they do it, you have to pay them. But just because you observe their work and appreciate it, that doesn't mean you owe them any money. So remuneration the idea that we should remunerate artists is false. But we should support artists. If we want to have arts to enjoy, we need to support artists. Note the difference. I'm not saying that you have a debt to any artist in particular. I'm saying for your own practical interest in having art to enjoy, you should give money to artists somehow. So how do we do that? Well, I don't see anything wrong with selling copies or selling tickets to a performance. With the somewhat reduced copyright system, the artists will still be able to sell copies and have a monopoly on selling copies for the time that the copyright lasts. Since there's nothing wrong about these, I don't propose to change these methods, but I propose new methods, additional ways to support artists. Now, one of them would work through the state. Suppose the state collects a certain amount of money every year or allocates a certain amount of money for artists and divides that money among the artists based on their popularity. It can measure popularity through polling or sampling what people are doing in a way that respects their privacy, and then having a popularity figure for each artist, it can decide how much that artist gets out of the total. The obvious way to do this is not good. The obvious way to divide up the money is in linear proportion. So if A is twice as popular as B, then A would get twice as much money as B. But if the star A is 1,000 times as popular as B, A would get 1,000 times as much money as B, which is wasting the money. Because, now I see what's making the buzzing. So that would mean almost all of this money goes to a few stars, which wouldn't help the arts at all. So I propose take the cube root of the popularity figures. Why cube root? Because it looks like this. It keeps rising, but more and more slowly. The cube root of 1,000 is 10. If A is a star and has 1,000 times the popularity of B, the cube root is only 10 times. So A would get 10 times as much money as B instead of 1,000 times. The effect of using the cube root is to transfer most of the money from the stars to the mid-range artists, which is where this support will really help the arts. Now, each star will still get more than any non-star because the cube root function never goes down. It keeps going up. The more popular you are, the more money you get. But not astronomically more. So this way, the system will efficiently support artists who could use support and that the public appreciates. The other system I propose is voluntary payments. If every player has a button to send a small sum of money to the artist, people would push it or not. And what's a small sum? I don't mean a micropayment. I mean a sum that's small enough that lots of people would be happy to send it, but big enough that it adds up to something, like maybe 20 euro cents. It has to be anonymous, of course, to respect people's freedom. And then you would send it or not. It's totally up to you. But when you send money, you'll feel good. That's why people will send it. It's not a lot of money unless they're really poor. And there are poor people who will never send this money because they can't afford it. And that's good. We shouldn't squeeze money out of poor people for appreciating arts when they have time. But there are plenty of non-poor people who can afford it, and they'll happily send money. Voluntary payments are working already. Look at crowdfunding. It works. They can raise even $1 million for a project. Even pay if you like it works. A few years ago, some well-known science fiction writers released the Humble ebook bundle on the basis of pay if you like it. They got $1 million in a month. It was equivalent, they said, to being on the New York Times bestseller list. So, voluntary payments work, but if we make them totally easy, they'll work more. So, at this point, it's time for the auction. This is the adorable GNU that needs a home. So I'm going to auction it for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. If you buy it, I can sign the card for you. If you have a penguin at home, you need a GNU for your penguin. There should never be a GNU without a penguin. So we can accept payment in cash or with a bank card if it can make international purchases by phone, or with Bitcoin if you have something here to make the Bitcoin payment with to the FSF. And I suppose that there will be time for you to go to a bank machine and come back while I answer questions. So, when you offer, please wave your arm and shout the amount you're offering so I notice you. If a bid is made and the auctioneer doesn't see it, did the bid really happen? Strange philosophical question, which we don't. You should make sure the question is never raised here. And I'm going to start with more or less the regular price of 25 euros. Do I get 25 euros for this adorable GNU? How much?
26.
I've got 26 euros. Do I have 30 euros or more? 30 euros or more for this adorable GNU? I've got 30. Do I get 35? I've got 35. Do I get 40? I've got 35. Do I get 40 euros? How much? I've got 40. Please be silent if you're not bidding. I want to hear the people who are bidding. I've got 40. Do I get 45?
45.
I've got 45. How much? 50. I've got 50. Do I get 55? 55 euros for this adorable GNU. 55 euros or more to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom.
55.
I've got 55. Do I get 60? 60 euros for this adorable GNU. 60 or more to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. Last chance to offer 60 euros or more. Last chance. Going. Gone for 55.
Wow.
Thank you. I'll sign it after the questions. Okay, so now I have to take a brief break for. How are we going to work this? Is there another microphone for people asking questions? How are we going to work this? What name? What's your name?
Valentino.
Valentino. How are we going to handle the questioning?
Come ci organizziamo abbiamo un altro microfono?
No, perché se sono in inglese qui, se sono in italiano vanno tradotte.
E quindi qui. So we're going to manage this way. If any question is raised, has to be raised from there.
Okay, and I'll put these on in case I need translation. Anything you like, just do it. Get straight to the point.
Okay.
Don't apologize, don't thank me, go straight to the point and be brief.
I'll thank myself. No, la mia domanda è questa. Noi abbiamo difficoltà anche per la nostra radio a raccontare al popolo quali sono le idee che sono state espresse oggi. Cioè, quello che noi in Italia si chiama la casalinga di Voghera. The Housewife of Voghera. Perché le idee...
Get straight to the point, please. Straight to the
Come
question.
si può convincere delle persone a prendere quella via del software libero
Okay,
quando...
Let me answer. You'll see what I've done today is my best idea for how to do it. You bring up the ethical issues in a way everyone can understand, and then you show that proprietary software developers are mistreating the users actually, not just as a theoretical possibility, but as a real fact, and that we hope gets people to want to do something about it. That's the best method I've come up with. It's not universal. There are people who are really foolish, who won't give up any convenience for their freedom, and so I give up on them. I don't waste time trying to convince somebody who's not listening. Instead, I use them as examples of foolishness. Because the reason that they're foolish is that they don't value their freedom at all. And people who don't value their freedom will lose it. Next question. Those of you who have questions, please come here and line up now. Don't make us wait like this. Be there, be ready to ask a question when it's time. Is there anyone else who has a question, you know? If there are no more questions, I can say I'm done. Those of you who have questions, please go there now and make a queue. Be ready to ask when the answer is finished.
E abbiamo parlato molto del free software, ma per quanto riguarda l'hardware?
Basically, it's not the hardware that can be free, it's the hardware designs that can be free. And I've written an article about that, gnu.org/philosophy/freehardwaredesigns.html.
La differenza e i punti in comune con ciò che ha fatto negli anni passati Aaron Swartz e come ha visto il suo lavoro, la sua lotta, diciamo.
Well, I know that Aaron Swartz was involved in trying to liberate some databases of court information, and that I think was a good thing. We don't know what he was trying to do by downloading those papers from, was it JSTOR? And but what we do know is that JSTOR does something wrong. Scientific articles behind a paywall are wrong, and governments should simply refuse to support any research whose without the condition that its results must be published properly, which means with no paywall and with an under CC BY as the license.
Thank you. Un'altra cosa, se aveva
Wait.
Se aveva considerato altri modi per misurare l'eventuale contributo artistico che non sia la popolarità, perché effettivamente può essere un buon modo, ma magari può avere degli inconvenienti.
No. The reason why I propose to use popularity as the measure is that that's what copyright does. So I'm trying to replace the existing system of copyright based on stopping people from sharing with something that would support artists more or less similarly. Now, there are already government programs that support artists based on other things. You know, there are government grants to particular artistic activities, and I'm in favor of that. I don't see why we should stop doing that, but we don't need me to propose that. The idea is already in practice. Now, of course, more variants of this idea could be considered. If somebody has another suggestion for how to evaluate artistic works for this kind of support, let's think about it, but I don't have one. I don't think that we want to have a jury decide which art is good, because then they will reject the new kinds of art that appear.
Grazie.
So if I understand correctly, you are proposing to release after 10 years of copyright, to release, to have the artworks under Creative Commons Zero public domain.
To make them put them in the public domain.
Why not an attribution license? What's the reason to not use?
I wouldn't be against that. You know, if you put that into copyright law, that even after the work is in the public domain, it still must be cited. That's okay.
To give credits to the authors.
I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Okay. Thank you.
These various proposals I've stated are not a complicated, intricate plan in which every detail has to be exactly what I said, or else it won't work at all. It's more like a series of different changes that are needed, and for the most part, we can change them whatever way we like.
Come vede la possibilità di grosse società che costruiscono operating system di pilotare l'architettura delle CPU per farle funzionare meglio con i loro sistemi operativi?
We don't need anything like that. We in the GNU project do a fine job of maintaining the system software to work with new CPU architectures. We don't need the companies to control the compilers, for instance. I'd like to remind people to please come up here and sit up here if you have a question to ask.
Come considera il contributo di Edward Snowden alla società?
3 cheers for Edward Snowden. Hip, hip, hurrah! Hip, hip, hurrah! Hip, hip, hurrah! Edward Snowden is a great hero of democracy, trying to show us to what extent the government is spying on everyone. And note that just because we only have his information for the U.S., that doesn't mean other governments are better. It just means we know less about what they are doing. And that's even more dangerous. Other countries are still waiting for their Snowdens. And many countries have been changing their laws to eliminate all limits on what surveillance they can do ostensibly in the name of national security. But what kind of national security do we need? We need security from tyranny above all. Terrorists are a small danger compared with the danger of a state that's gone out of control. So, in order to have democracy, we need to make sure we know what the state is doing. And we depend on whistleblowers like Stallman to tell us. But if the state monitors people so much that it can always find the whistleblowers and put them in prison, it'll be hard for anyone to tell us what the state is doing. So, Snowden personally deserves our support and admiration, but beyond that, we have to take up the fight that he launched, that he took those risks to enable us to carry out, and that is against massive accumulation of data about people. We must fight against the systems that collect data. Milan has imposed a system that tracks cars. That must be abolished. Whatever problem they're trying to solve, there's a way to solve it that respects people's privacy. So it's up to people who live in and near Milan to demand that they stop snooping on people. And this is just one example. See gnu.org/surveillance-vs-democracy.html.
Quanto è grave l'indifferenza che c'è stata alla sentenza delle Nazioni Unite del fatto che Assange adesso è detenuto illegalmente nell'ambasciata dell'Ecuador a Londra?
Well, I don't think that decision has a big effect. It is clear that the Swedish government is acting in an abusive fashion by rejecting the opportunity to go and question him in the embassy, which he and the Ecuadorian government have been offering ever since he was first there. They both said, we're not trying to hide from these accusations. You say you want to question Assange, well, why don't you do it? But this is what convinces me that those charges are just an excuse. If the Swedish prosecutors were concerned about justice for those women who make the accusations, they would have questioned Assange as fast as possible. But instead, they're dragging it out as long as they can. They allowed some of the charges to expire through the statute of limitations. They didn't care really about prosecuting Assange. They only want to send Assange to the U.S. to be prosecuted for doing good for the world.
Grazie, thank you.
Si è parlato molto di libertà, diciamo, in questi anni che stiamo vivendo adesso, le persone si sentono rassegnate dal fatto di essere costantemente spiate, che sia impossibile eludere uno spionaggio di massa. A volte non se ne preoccupano, pensano che se loro non hanno nulla da nascondere, questa cosa può andare bene?
Well, actually,
Cosa possiamo
people do have
rispondere?
something to hide. Everyone does. Someone measured accesses to Wikipedia pages and discovered that after Snowden told us how much we were being snooped on, accesses to Wikipedia pages about topics such as Al-Qaeda and car bomb went down. It's clear people think that if they look at these pages, they'll be put on some sort of suspicion list. And as a result, they don't look. Well, this shows it went down by 20%. This shows that a lot of people feel scared. And the same people will probably say, I don't have any secrets, I have nothing to hide. But this is nonsense. You don't know if you have something to hide. If a tyrannical government wants to persecute you, any facts about you might help. So, in fact, well, I don't know about Italy, but some lawyers say the typical American commits 5 felonies per day, mostly not knowing. So if they want to put you in prison, if they can find out everything about you, they have a wonderful opportunity to do so. Basically, we all have reasons to be scared, and we all sometimes have secrets that we don't want shared with the whole world. And if you wait until the day you actually have a secret that matters to you before you start campaigning to have privacy, it'll be too late. We've got to start campaigning now. We've got to start denouncing all the snooping now. We've got to reject the terrorism excuse now.
Thank you.
Io volevo chiedere se esistono dispositivi mobili che possiamo utilizzare con solo software libero, tipo smartphone.
That we can use with only free software. Is that unfortunately there are not. Well, phones, no. Tablets, maybe. The problem with the phone is every phone has the modem processor, which talks to the phone radio network. And that only runs non-free software. We have no free replacement. And many of those chips now check for the manufacturer's signature on the program. So even if we wrote a free program to run them, they would refuse to execute the free program. And that processor is where the universal backdoor is. In most phone models, that processor can replace the software in the other processor. So even if you have put a free system in the other processor, for instance, Replicant is a free version of Android. So yes, you can run exclusively free software in the application processor, but when they decide they want to mistreat you, they can send commands to the modem processor to replace the software in the application processor. So you cannot trust a mobile phone. We have an idea for how to perhaps make a mobile phone extender product that could make a trustworthy mobile phone. But in order for it to be trustworthy, you can't use it to communicate very often. Because every time you use it to communicate, Big Brother knows where you are. So the idea is put in a one-way pager. And that way, when someone wants to call you, he can page you first to say, hi, I want to talk to you, and why. It's urgent or not urgent. And that way you can decide where you are willing to reveal your location.
Volevo sapere, visto che il software proprietario si fonda sulla spirale potere denaro, no? Sempre più potere, sempre più denaro, E il software libero, bene o male, esce da questa logica, no? Però il computer ha comunque bisogno di essere alimentato e di essere prodotto. Se ci potrà mai veramente essere una libertà nell'utilizzo della tecnologia.
I'm afraid you have mixed up two questions. One is development of software, and the other is production of computers. And computers, of course, are not generally made and handed out gratis. They're sold. So that provides the money to pay for producing the computers. Now, development of software is a different thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be paid. There are volunteers who write a lot of useful free software. But the next thing is that we can also raise money to pay people to write free software. There are free software businesses. There are quite a few of them. In addition, there is crowdfunding as a way to pay people to write free software. There are big companies that subsidize some free software. Governments can subsidize free software. They pay for a lot of software development anyway. It might as well all be free. So, yes, we can develop a lot of free software if, as a society, we put our minds to it.
Sì, però da un punto di vista di sostenibilità, proprio sia economica che anche da un punto di vista ambientale, il software e la produzione di energia così, chiedo se non c'è un modo secondo te di togliere
It's a meaningless question because these are several different questions. If you're talking about environmental sustainability, that only affects the hardware. Free software tends to allow old hardware to run for longer because it's not developed as part of a scheme for planned obsolescence. So it's good for environmental issues. It doesn't guarantee everything is done in the best possible way, but then making the hardware is out of our hands anyway. We can only have a partial influence on that. But in terms of when you say economically sustainable, what does that mean? Remember that a proprietary program is an injustice. It's evil. It shouldn't be developed, and if it does exist, for your freedom's sake, don't use it. I won't use it. It's not even an option as far as I'm concerned to do computing with proprietary software. It's free software or nothing. And nothing is better than a proprietary program. A proprietary program is worse than nothing. So the question of how efficient it is to produce, how much the economic system supports producing this evil user subjugating software, for me is a question of no relevance. I don't want it to be produced. I wish nobody would make any proprietary software ever again. The question is, to what extent can we support the development of free software so that people will make more of it? And the answer is, it's just up to how much we want to. Because there are many ways we can contribute our funds to paying for the development of free software, either privately or through the state. And really, it's just a matter of what society decides to do.
Thank you.
Pensavo che Debian fosse un sistema operativo libero, però non lo vedo sul sito, quindi lo è, non lo è?
Well, okay, you won't see it in the list of free distros, but there's another page, gnu.org/distros/commondistros.html, which is in the same directory, which explains the flaws with well-known non-free distros. And it explains about Debian. Debian carefully separates free software from non-free software. But Debian does distribute both. If you look at Debian.org, you will see information about the non-free programs that are distributed by Debian. Now, they say that those programs are officially not part of Debian GNU/Linux, but they do come from the Debian website. So in practical terms, they're effectively part of Debian. And that's the reason why we don't recommend Debian to the public. Now, if you are a committed free software activist and you are determined to reject non-free software, you can do that by installing Debian. You won't enable the non-free parts, and you'll get only the free software. For a person like that, Debian can serve the purpose, but we can't recommend it to the general public because the general public won't pay attention to that distinction in a reliable way.
Io volevo sapere se conosci il concetto di singolarità come proposto da pensatori come Kurzweil e cosa come vedi come si relaziona questo con il free software e ad esempio con lo sviluppo di nanotecnologie.
Okay, let me start. So, first of all, I should explain what the technological singularity means. It does not mean exponential progress. Exponential progress is nothing new. No, the technological singularity is a theoretical idea, an imaginary scenario in which there's much more than exponential progress. Rather, in which technology goes effectively to infinity in a fixed period of time, in a finite period. So don't think e to the x, think of 1 over x. 1 over x has a singularity at 0. As you get closer and closer to 0, 1 over x goes up and up and up, or down and down and down from the other side. The point is, that would be something that humans couldn't cope with. So, the idea is that artificial intelligence might lead to such a singularity, because once there's an AI program smart enough to develop a smarter AI program, then the next one will be able to develop an even smarter AI program even faster. And so the progress will accelerate more than exponentially, and it could go effectively to infinity or to whatever limit there is that prevents it from actually reaching infinity before at a fixed point. So as you get closer and closer to that point, a week before things would be changing very fast, but a day before they'd be changing even faster, and an hour before they'd be changing even faster. I tend to think that humanity would be wiped out by this. Werner Vinge proposed the idea of a technological singularity in the book Marooned in Real Time. But if you look at the book A Fire Upon the Deep, he proposed a universe where physical limits in different places limit the level of technology. So at a certain place in the galaxy, you can't travel faster than light. Earth is there. And then in other parts of the galaxy you can, but AIs only work to a certain extent, and then you go further out and godlike AIs become possible. But they're somewhat separated, and as a result, the godlike AIs can't just go through everywhere and chew everything up, because if they went further in, they wouldn't function anymore. They can only function in the outer zones. But there's no reason to think that that's true. If we have a technological singularity on Earth, I think that nothing like us will remain. But who knows whether anything like a technological singularity is possible? It's just a speculation. So we don't really know anything about what would happen if, what's really possible, what's really likely to happen. We're just making guesses.
E a parte la singolarità, comunque in questi anni si stanno sviluppando nanotecnologie che che lasciano immaginare la possibilità di introdurre microchip nanochip all'interno del corpo umano. Quindi eventualmente anche software proprietario o libero all'interno ad esempio organi o
yes, we need to demand that medical devices carry free software that we can control.
La mia domanda riguarda direttamente la mia attività. Assumiamo questo scenario. Io creo un sito di e-commerce bellissimo per un'azienda e lo
get straight to the point, please.
Okay.
No superlatives, just what's the question?
Ok. E lo distribuisco come software libero per dare proprio la libertà a questa azienda di poter far manutenzione, dare tutte le varie libertà.
Ok, get straight to the point, please.
Devo capire. Allora, ok, un'altra società va a fare manutenzione a quel software. Quest'altra società è libera di distribuirlo riducendo il vantaggio competitivo rispetto al mio e-commerce che ho creato?
Yes. Free software means every user that gets a copy gets the 4 freedoms, including the freedom to distribute modified versions. But here's an interesting point for websites or any kind of server. There are free programs that are often used on servers, and with those there is a risk. Well, first of all, you have to realize that part of the goal of copyleft is so that when somebody makes an improved version and releases it, we get those changes and we can put them into the original version if we want. And that's a good thing. So if this program were copylefted and you distributed the original version and somebody makes a modified version and he wants to distribute it, he'd have to distribute his improvements as free software also so that you would be free to use them. But the problem with servers is, what if he just runs his improved version on his server and he never releases it to anybody? Then nobody is in a position to give you a copy and you'll never get those changes. Because we saw this problem, we wrote the Affero GPL. The GNU Affero GPL says if you run a modified version on a server and you allow others access to talk to the server, you must permit them to download the version that's running on the server. So that way, if he runs a modified version on his server, he's required, and if he lets the public talk to his server, he's required to let you download his version, and of course it has to come under the same license. So if you release your version under the Affero GPL, you will require him to let you get the source code if he allows the public to use his server. This is the last question.
Okay. Do you have never taken in a future of Free Software Foundation without Richard Stallman, like
Sorry,
Apple?
What?
Future, a next future without
you
you.
mean what is the Free Software Foundation going to do when I'm dead?
Yeah, it's that.
Well,
okay.
It will manage without me. Gradually, I'm letting the board take over more of the responsibility so that the FSF will be able to continue operating someday without me.
How? You look like Apple with Steve Jobs.
I don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
I don't know what you want to know.
Thank you.
We need more strongly committed free software activists. This is absolutely vital. And you can become one. You can become one here. So, happy hacking. So now, once again, we're going to be selling things outside the door. And there are stickers which are gratis that you can just take.
Grazie Richard, ringraziamo la Camera del Lavoro di Monza e Brianza, la CGIL Lombardia, tutta la FIOM. Voglio ringraziare in particolare i tecnici di Sintel, Matteo Riboldi, Mary, Claudio e tutti i compagni che hanno realizzato questa iniziativa. Da domani saremo attivisti, qualcuno lo è già, del software libero. Grazie a tutti.